Welcome back to another episode of the Empowerful Health Podcast. I'm the host, Dr. Jeremy Kerrigan, and today I've got a very special, a very pregnant guest on. Hannah, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, empowered people. My name is Hannah Lynn Brooks. I am a practicing acupuncturist with a whole bunch of really weird hippie background experience, being a body worker for many years, being a yoga teacher, specifically in the fascial yoga world, and being a birth worker. They're my big four, I would say.
You started pretty young too. I think you said you were a doula at like 18.
Yeah, I was. I went to massage school shortly after I turned 18. And that was, have we talked about that?
I don't think so, actually, no.
There was a school shooting at the high school that I was at.
Okay.
So I was actually at CU Boulder, and I was like, graduated a year early. I was going to be pre-law. I thought I was going to be like Elle Woods and like become a lawyer.
It was right about the time the movie came out.
Totally, yeah. I was like, I'm going to be a hippie version of that. And then the class that I grew up with, because I graduated early, experienced this incredible trauma of a school shooting in Colorado. It was a solid decade after Columbine, but it was very tragic and very traumatic. And I had just gone off to college and came home. My whole community was traumatized, and I was traumatized, and I was freaking out and had all this just crying all the time. And my mom didn't really know what to do with me. So she got me a massage, and I had an incredibly cathartic experience on that table. And it changed my life.
A lot of emotional release along with the physical tension
shaking,
release.
Crying like a baby. Just really something moving through my body and my nervous system. And I remember that experience. I remember feeling emptied out at the end and like grounded again. And I remember at some point that lady was like, you should check out Boulder College of Massage Therapy. And yeah, it changed my life.
Way led on to way, and here you are today.
Yeah. So that really set me on my path of like exploring healing modality and body work. Okay. Which is cool because previous to that, you know, I'd had a handful of massages as a teenager, and I just spent the whole time like trying to suck in my body and like not totally relax. And I think everyone as a receiver of body work and healing modalities has like a different moment or time, like when you actually really let the work in.
Sure. A time of like vulnerability where you're able to just let someone else into your space. Like,
yeah. Where you find the right practitioner or the right practice that like actually jives with you and makes a difference in your system in whatever significant way.
Well, and there's too a time where like you're internally ready too. And like in that situation, you were in incredibly vulnerable state with all that stress and trauma that your body was willing to let somebody in because it needed help. It didn't know how to process all this information it was getting.
Totally.
Yeah. So fascinating.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. We've known each other for quite a while. Yeah. She's been my acupuncturist. We've been good friends. So it's really pretty cool to hear your backstory a little bit there. So you did all these different trainings. What I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit today is you've been in the birth realm for a while. Yeah. You've been assisting, I don't know how many women you've probably helped in this realm.
Maybe about a dozen births I've attended.
And then more with acupuncture and massage and everything else. And now you're experiencing it live and in person on yourself. So let's talk a little bit about how this has changed your perspective and what you would tell moms after going through this part yourself.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is one of my greatest teachers is Tom Myers, who has the Anatomy Trains thing. He's up in Maine. And one of the things I've heard him say multiple times is if you're not regularly embarrassed by the work you did 2 years ago and feeling like you should give people their money back, then you're not doing it right. You're not progressing as a practitioner. And the first time I had a really clear experience of that was I remember one time when I had my practice in Vermont, I gave this woman a massage, and it was shortly after her father had died. And I was like, I just gave this woman the best massage ever. I held the best space for her. She was really emotional. And like, I did such an amazing job holding her through that. And then years later, my dad died. And I kept thinking about that session and that woman and being like, I should give her her money back. I just had this feeling of like, I just had no idea what she was going through.
Sure.
Truly. And I feel like pregnancy and birth is like that. I feel like maybe I should give some of those women their money back.
But at the same time, I'm sure you were amazing in those situations and very helpful.
Yeah, of course. I think for my time and my service, it was worth getting compensated. And it's just that kind of thing that like, there are just some, I would almost call them initiations in life that you just cannot fully understand or comprehend either the gravity, the intensity, the complexity until you go through it yourself.
Absolutely.
And birth feels like that to me.
Well, and literally 50% of the population can't go through it. So some of us that will never fully understand. But sure, it is one of those things. And even like birth is different. And like, you haven't gone through birth yet, but pregnancy, it's different. For every woman experiences a little differently. Totally. And there's very simple pregnancies. I've known women who felt better pregnant than not pregnant, which is pretty rare, but like, being able to experience at least a part of what someone else is does increase your empathy and your perspective.
Totally. Well, even though, men can't experience directly being pregnant, I think the experience of like becoming a parent,
right?
A lot of my work as a doula was actually to help the men.
Oh, sure.
And to bridge that gap of like, how can they be involved? And one of the things that I talk about as a doula is there's always this moment in the birth where it starts to get really intense and really primal. And the men will look at me with this intense concern.
Sure. Fear.
For their women. And I will have a moment with them and be like, this is okay.
Right.
And that to me has been across the board the most incredible moment of every birth I've been a part of. And even that has shifted because I'm like, oh my God, like now I sort of understand the gravity of like just being with my man, my husband, and watching him grapple with like being the provider and being the masculine pole of the family and everything he wants to teach our children, and even the natural, beautiful, difference in the way that we think about that, where I'm thinking about diapers and towels and breastfeeding, and he's thinking about
college,
how do we make a good person, and like how do we instill a work ethic, and I'm just like, can we start with a little bit of sleep,
Right. It's really interesting because you're talking about this, and it is like you're like you were explaining with this lady you did the massage on, and had lost her mother, was it?
Her
father. And then when you experienced it yourself, there's going through it personally, but there's also going through it with someone you love.
Yeah.
Like watching my wife go through 5 childbirths has been given me a lot more empathy. 5 pregnancies and childbirths has given me a lot more empathy for women who are pregnant, understanding I don't know exactly what it feels like, but I've watched someone that I love dearly experience it, all the highs, lows, glories, and terrible days all at the same time. And that does give me a lot more empathy. Yeah. And then I wanted to highlight too, I don't know if people listening don't know what a doula is. A doula is like a birth assistant. They're not, a midwife or a doctor delivering the baby. They're basically there to support mom and dad, and help through the process. Correct? Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say just like any other practitioner in industry, people sort of specialize in certain things. So the realm of a doula is always non-medical. Okay. And support staff. So some people take that to mean like education and advocation. Some people have more of a bodywork spin on it of like, we're going to squeeze your hips like this. We're going to touch you here. Some people are like, witchier about it, and they do the affirmations, and some doulas are really into hypnobirthing. And so anything kind of in that realm of like assistance that may be mental, emotional, environmental, setting the space, making a plan, or even like navigating the medical system.
Oh, sure. Helping them advocate for what they would like in that birth process. There were 2 main things that we had doulas present for 2 births, and then we coached with one ahead of another birth. So our 3rd kid. And there was one main thing from that birth that came away, and it was that moment you talked about, the transition, where it gets really intense, and that's usually where the moms are like, I want to go home. I'm so done. Please let me stop, And the dads, I was that dad that's like, oh my goodness, this woman I love is having this terrible thing happen to her, and I have zero power to control. And so the doula was sitting down, and she's like, this is your job, Dad. Your job is to remind her that transition is right before the end, like it's very shortly before the baby comes. And it was very entertaining because the doula wasn't there at the birth, but my wife got to that point and she was there. And I was like, okay, this is what she told me. She prepared me. And so I'm like, sweetheart, this is almost there. And the look she gave me, like, will be burned in my mind forever. Like the glare, like this isn't possible,
If I could breathe fire, I would.
But 30 minutes later, we had a baby, So the doula was correct. I won't say that I was right because that's not how it works. But the doula was right, you know. And for my wife's defense, it was a very short birth. I think about 3.5 to 4 hours. So we're 3 hours into the process. And I'm like, oh, you're almost there. She's like, there's no way. Like I've done this before. It's not this. And then the second thing was a little less serious. But during our last one, the doula went and got me food. It was great. So that barbecue and French fries tasted better than any food on the planet.
It's the simple things.
Yes, just making sure that moms and dads have what they need in that situation is pretty cool. So.
Yeah. What's remarkable about a birth doula specifically is in most cases everywhere across the United States, they're the only person other than your birth partner who's going to attend the full birth.
Sure.
So even in a home birth midwife situation, the idea is that like the medical staff need to be well rested. And so they're trying to arrive like during transition when you're about to push. They're not going to stay with you for 20 hours or 30 hours while you labor.
Right.
And then try to be alert and deliver a baby medically at the end. The doula is the one who stays with you the whole birth. And that's why they're much more expensive than 15 years ago when I first started. I was charging like $600 for a birth, sheesh. And we just hired someone for a very reasonable price, and I think it was like $1,400.
Sure.
And I'm like, yeah, that's correct. I mean, I stopped being a doula because I kept signing on for 50-hour births, and I would have to cancel a whole week of work.
Right. And that's not
20
feasible.
Massages. Yeah. Canceled for a 50-hour birth that I had to recover from.
Right. That's a really good description. I've never heard it described that way before. And that makes sense that it's kind of a scale. I feel like midwives are there more than like a medical doctor. The doctor, totally. Like the nurses call, they're like, the baby's coming, come now. Because they're attending 12 different births or something. I'm exaggerating, but they may have several at the same time. They're writing charts. And like you said, they need to be well rested because if there's something that goes wrong, you don't want a doctor who's been up for 40, 50 hours trying to make a decision for you. You know, you want someone who's well rested. So that idea of the doula being there and being present more and being, again, kind of part of the team to help support this wonderful woman going through the birth process. So
as a doula, my experience is, I think it's remarkable because the only other thing I can kind of liken it to is honestly a therapeutic psychedelic experience where you enter into this other world. I remember the sensation of the first birth I attended, it was 55 hours. It ended up with a vaginal birth, and she tore really badly and had to go to surgery afterwards. Ended up getting blood and stuff like that. But
if you're pregnant, that's rare, just for reference. I don't want to scare anybody there.
This is not a normal thing. But sure. And even still, even though it was really long and really hard, she still successfully had a vaginal birth and a healthy baby. And so that perspective is always good. But after that amount of time and that intense of an experience, and then even like just being in the room, the baby comes out, like mom is not the only one getting an oxytocin rush. Sure. Like I'm feeling that too. I'm feeling all of those hormones, dopamine and oxytocin coursing through my body. I'm exhausted because I've been up for days too. And I leave that room and I'm like, what? There's a regular world out here? Like, where have I been for days? How long has it been? Like, the sunshine is out. That's weird. Like, it just is this otherworldly experience. that is in some ways like clearly separate than regular everyday life.
Cool. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so neat. The creation of life and that birth moment is such a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
One moment there's no baby and the next there is. There is, but
yeah.
That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that experience.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to wrap up here, but what advice as a currently pregnant mom with all this birth experience or, in the past and helping people, what would maybe be a couple of things you'd advise women who are pregnant and going through the process on?
I think number one across the board is surrender, right? Which I had heard about and used to do Dharma talks on and all kinds of things. And it's this wonderful spiritual concept. But I think, lately I've been hearing a lot from existing moms and parents, like the complications that I'm having in my pregnancy currently and the amount of surrender that I've had to do. They'll say like, oh, you're just starting your parenting a little early, because the amount of surrender that you have, that you have to utilize in parenting,
right?
You're just getting a couple months head start on that by not having your perfect ideal birth situation.
That's a really beautiful way of putting it, because parenting is a lot of choosing your battles, as my wife likes to say. And you have a creature, a being that has its own free will.
Yeah.
And you have to work with that.
And you have to like face reality, so there's like the perfect ideal birth, bunnies in the cloud of grass and, and the angels sing and like nothing is painful. And then there's just like the reality of like, oh, there is a complication. There is something that we need to respond to, or there is a limitation here.
Right.
And it's, I haven't gotten to the parenting part, but I'm sure that's part of it too. There's a reality here, whether it's something that you agree with and want to be experiencing or whether you don't want to be experiencing. I think facing the reality and having a certain amount of a surrender practice around that, which is not, I'm going to let the doctors do whatever they're going to do. It's not like a passive surrender. It's a intentional, spiritual, willful surrender to be on the same page as reality, to face reality, with your own agency.
It's a really beautiful sentiment, not just for birth, but for life.
Yeah.
Like there's the ideal of any aspect of life of what we want it to look like. And there's a reality of what it is. And we don't just have to accept what it is face value, but we also have to take that into account when we're making the decisions going forward.
Yeah.
Very true in birth, because there's very few ideal births out there on this planet. Most have something.
Yeah.
Taking that into account to make the decisions. That's cool.
Yeah.
Any other advice you want to share?
Well, one of the things that just popped into my head about what you were just saying is in Chinese medicine, we think of even the most perfect, smooth birth as an intense trauma with a significant blood loss.
Sure.
Because even if everything goes well, you're having a huge mineral transfer for your iron stores and your minerals. And that's like the basis of blood in Chinese medicine. And so I think the hardest part for specifically American women is wrapping your head around the degree of pouring in that needs to happen after the birth.
Sure. Rebuilding stockpiles and
nutritionally,
the body.
Emotionally, mentally. It's just, we have a very weird, non-supportive culture about that.
Right.
And we could do a whole nother podcast on that. But I think in general, like the amount of nourishing, high quality nutritional foods that need to be eaten, the amount of bone broth, the amount of regular glucose balance meals that need to happen postpartum in order to rebuild is way more than most women would even think of.
So I love that there's been a shift towards this idea of a fourth trimester.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information out there. Not a lot of women are getting it still. There's still a lot of depravity in that, but like there is so much important stuff. You know, it's not about bouncing back 2 weeks later and getting back to life. It's really about replenishing yourself. I love that you said, you know, physically like getting the right nutrients in, but also emotionally and other aspects to support that, you know.
Totally.
We often talk, my wife and I, about how when we brought a kid into the world, it's an 18-month process. 9 months in, 9 months out before my wife and myself start feeling like ourselves again.
Totally. And that even kind of lines up too with like, there's many cultures around the world that consider the mom and the baby one unit for at least 9 months, if not 18 months.
Interesting.
Through the child being born. And it's just, that's its own otherworldly time, the postpartum time. And it's way beyond 6 weeks. We know that. It's at least 9 months, maybe 18 out of the womb. Like it's a big process overall. And, you know, you could pull from all these different sources, but a lot of people say you're not hormonally back until 2 years. You can't be hormonally back until you stop breastfeeding. And then some people say you're never the same. Like you're never going to be the same. Your metabolism is different. Your hormones are different. Your, you know, risk of certain cancers is different after you give birth. And
even just your responsibility in life. Like you weren't a mother and then you are a mother. And that role doesn't go away. There's like the role is incredibly huge right now. You know, you're literally feeding that baby everything it needs, but that role doesn't change. It changes, but it doesn't ever go away. You know, I talk to people, my wife, her mom was a stay-at-home mom. When her mom left for a year and a half and wasn't available as much, my wife felt it. And she was 30 something years old. You know, she's like, not having my mom available as much was a challenge. And so that role is always there. It's a big shift there.
Yeah.
So, any last comments before we wrap up today? It's been wonderful having you on here. I always love your perspective on this, and it's really cool to get to share in your experience a little bit and hear your story.
It's really fun to have you, see you from time to time through the pregnancy and be able to, you know, have some sage advice and a place I can go to ask about kids 1 through 5.
Yes. Yeah, I have a little bit of kid experience.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Well, usually at the end of the podcast, we tell you how to connect with her and, you know, see more of what she does, but she's focusing entirely on the baby. She's not going to be doing acupuncture for a while, but once you're back, she's amazing. And look up acupuncture. She does, what type of acupuncture is he in?
I do integrative styles of acupuncture. So I would say my wheelhouse is orthopedic.
Nice.
So I do classical Chinese medicine and French Vietnamese channel acupuncture. And I was trained in Japanese acupuncture. And it's all just a bunch of fancy trainings to say, like, if I feel good to you, come see me. I can do some pretty heavy muscular work and some pretty light esoteric work and anything in between. And I do still have a website up. It's acubabe.com.
Nice.
And I'm about to go on maternity leave for an undetermined period of time. And so we'll see where I resurface next.
I will say one of the things I most liked is your attention to detail within the acupuncture realm. You know, there's a lot of fly-by-night acupuncturists who go to a couple weekend seminars, and I was nervous about acupuncture when I first came to see you. You were my first experience, and so if you've been curious about acupuncture, definitely look for someone who's very traditional medicine trained. You know, more Eastern, Western medicine is kind of taking it on, but I don't think they do it as well as thousands of years of development in Asia.
I agree.
So, there you go.
I agree.
Thanks again for being on here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.